and welcome back to another video. Woo! My second one. So first of all, thank you for all the nice feedbacks that I got on my very first video. It was very nerve-wracking. I was very nervous. Maybe you could tell. But now I already feel way more confident and comfortable. So today we will be talking about all the books I read in September and what is on my October TBR. What am I reading this October? In September, I've read a total of 8 books. That's the most I've read this year in a month. It was a very big reading month for me. Usually my maximum is 6. I've been very consistent on 6 books a month ever since I think May. And last month I was actually traveling in the beginning of the month. And when I travel, there's a lot of time for me to read, to listen to audiobooks. So obviously that kind of helped me with reading more books because I had traveled to Italy. So I had a total of like 12 hours that I was just traveling in the train. So that really helped. Now, for the books I've read, I will go through them in order of reading. So the very first book I read, I don't have it physically because I read it digitally, actually, not even as an ebook, and it's actually a manhwa. So manhwa is the Chinese equivalent to manga or manhwa from Korea, and the one I've read is called Here You Are, and it's by the artist and storyteller called Djun. So as for the story, it is a BL manhwa, so it's boys love, which means it's just a relationship between 2 men is in the focus, so it's romance. And it was a reread for me. I really love this story. It's my favorite BL manhwa or even manga that I've ever read, and I felt it was at the time to reread. The reason was a friend asked for recommendation and I gave her a few, and then I was like, oh, I could like reread my favorite, and it's actually quite long. I spent the first 3 days of September mostly in bed on my phone reading. That was kind of wild, but it's just the kind of story that I just can't put down once I start reading it. Now, what is it about? Here You Are is about 2 men that meet at university, and they both come from very different backgrounds. It plays in China, and it's common, boys love, so it kind of goes the usual route. There's some miscommunication happening, there's some jealousy maybe, there's some things like that. However, it doesn't have the toxic traits that a lot of boys love manga have. The category I would say is fluff, but the story touches up on some very interesting subjects that make it more than just another love story for me. So obviously it touches up on the general discrimination that usually is a theme in boys love or in general in queer lit. So society is homophobic, maybe there's like family members that are homophobic. However, in Here You Are, there's a big focus on familial structures, and there's a big focus on filial piety. Where I live, the cultures I'm surrounded with, that's not really a subject. I never feel like I owe my parents, for example, that I will have a family. However, in this story, that is, for example, something that is brought up, and it also touches up on the subject of the one-child policy in China. Because if you only have one child, one son, then this son carries the whole weight. If he doesn't reproduce, then he's a failure to your family in this kind of understanding, and that is very much explored in the story, and I find it beautifully executed. The arcs of our characters, how they deal with that, both of them, especially with the subject of coming out to your family in this context of dealing with homophobia in the family and expectations in the family, are very beautifully explored. They're very thoughtful. It feels very personal to the author, which I really like. And for me, that's one of the reasons this story is definitely 5-star read for me. Yeah, that's Here You Are. There will be physical copies are being released, I think, at the moment, and I will definitely get them once all the physical books are out. At the moment, it's still in the process of being released. For now, there's digital releases, there's the official one that you can read. I personally read a fan translated one because the first time I read this story like 5-6 years ago, there was only the fan translation, so that's kind of what I went back to, but there are official translations now that you can read. So the second book that I read physically, And it's a classic. Oh my god, it's The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Now, I am not a classics person. Like, you will not find me reading classics. I'm not that academia aesthetic classic English lit reader. You know who you are, because I'm calling out some of my friends here. That is not me. I do not read old books. Not that I don't want to, but I just really struggle with the prose. However, I did read an H.G. Wells book in May, and it was nonfiction. I was like, I'm really interested in his fiction. When I was in Austria, there was a Shakespeare Company, and they sold Penguin Archive books. I was like, oh, they look so cute. I think I will see if there is more. I really like the design. Can we talk about it? Like the red and the white, beautiful. Anyway, so I got The Time Machine, and I read The Time Machine, and I loved The Time Machine. Oh my goodness, I loved it. It was so easy to read. I thought it was so interesting the way Wells chose the narration in this book. So it's written in first person. However, the entire story of the actual time traveling of the time traveler in the story is all told in direct speech. So he is telling the story. When it started, I was like, that's an interesting choice, because one could have just decided to tell a story of the time traveler. But instead, we as the first person narrator, we take this step back and we are listening to a story, which always gives us the benefit of the doubt, because we're only listening. We're not experiencing it at all. We're only there listening to this time traveling. And I thought that's a very, very interesting take. Now, what is this book about? In The Time Machine, we have a character called the Time Traveler who meets his friends once a week and they chat. We are one of his friends. So the first person narrator is one of the friends of the Time Traveler. And one day, the Time Traveler announces that he built this time machine, and they're all like, oh yeah, you know, you come travel time, blah, 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 and the usual. But the week after, he's late to the meeting. And when he comes back, he says, you won't believe it, I time traveled. And then he tells the story. So this guy travels into the year 802,701. I think that's correct. On our Earth, obviously. So he travels into the future and he experiences this future. It's a very interesting portrayal of the world, because we meet like these people, they have a different language, and every single thing the time traveler tells us about these people is an assumption. So that's something, while reading, I always kept in mind. He doesn't actually know if these people are the same species as he is, because they look different. He doesn't know how they became like that. They could be aliens, but he just assumes they are an evolution of the human species. And that's kind of how the whole story goes. There's so many times where the time traveler just assumes something. If you don't always keep in mind that that's just his opinion, that's just his guess, then you just take it. We don't know what these kind of creatures are. This world in the future very much feels like it's a utopia. The time traveler mentions that he thinks humans have come to their like final stage of evolution. They figured it all out. However, there seem to be things to uncover that are not like that. And so it kind of turns into a world where maybe not everything is as great as he thought it was. And he makes some shocking revelations. And I thought it was a really, really interesting read. There's a lot I could say about this book, but I don't want to spoil too much. So I've read a classic, and I liked it. I'm planning on reading The War of the Worlds by him, because I really like his writing style. I think it's very digestible, it's very easy to read, and it's also a little bit like it's fun, you know. I thought it was a fun read. So this one here, I give it 4 out of 5 stars. Not a good read this month. Actually, this month basically only had good reads, but we will come to that. So the next book I read as an ebook, I will be quite brief about it because yeah, there's things about it. So I read We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I hope I say that name right. I read that book up on a recommendation. For my goal this year, I still needed a book from an African author, and I decided to go with this one. And well, what can I say? There are some things actually marked in my e-reader, some quotes that I really like. And I also thought it was a strong speech, because it's a TED Talk originally, and I thought it was a strong speech. However, as I was reading it, there were certain things that felt very binary to me, and I kind of stumbled over them while reading, like what is a woman, what is a man. They were like these things were kind of explored, and while I was reading, in my head I was like, okay, it might be a product of its time. It wasn't written in the last 10 years. It's from this century, but I think it's from 2009 if I'm not wrong. So first I was like, oh yeah, okay, it might be a product of its time. Then I also thought in the cultural context of Nigeria, it might make sense to word things like that, because obviously a lot of things that she mentions are very specific to the place she grew up, because I could not relate to certain things that she wrote about how women and men are treated differently in society and by society. So that was like my initial thought. I was like, okay, feels a little, you know, not very inclusive in my opinion. And then last week I watched a YouTube video, and then a YouTuber just said, by the way, she's a TERF. And I was like, wait a minute. And I Googled, and yeah. So at first I gave the book a higher star rating. I bumped it down to 1 star. I do not support this kind of stance. As a queer person in the queer community, I don't, yeah. And I will not read a book from this author again. So we should all be feminists. Maybe we should all be actual feminists and consider trans people humans as well. That's my take on that one. Off to better news, to another author, one that I love. I've read The House of Many Ways. I told myself I will finish the House Moving Castle series. I read the first book 2 years ago, I think 2 years ago, and then I was just putting it off. I was so worried because I was like, oh, but House is so good. What if I don't like the other two? Like, my head does these things sometimes. And now this summer I was like, okay, you know what? We're reading those. So I have it physically here, but I listened to it on Spotify as an audiobook. I loved it. Another good read. Diana Wynne Jones does not disappoint. This book is about a girl named Charmaine. She is a bookworm. Relatable AF. What a queen. But she's a bookworm. She grew up extremely sheltered. Her mom always kept her from doing things because she's a proper lady. She should not be getting her hands dirty. That's the kind of vibe. She should be having a servant one day, and then they can do that for her. So she kind of doesn't know how to live life. She doesn't even know how to do the laundry. Like, hello. And her big dream is to work at the Royal Library as a librarian, which is, you know, slay, girl. I hope you can do it. Anyways, the book starts with her writing a letter to the king himself, actually, that she wants to work there. And then she gets summoned, basically, by a family member of hers that she needs to go to the house of her great uncle, who's a wizard, to take care of the house, to basically do house sitting while he is gone because he is sick and he needs to go to the elves to get treatment. So that puts us off to our journey with Charmaine. Promptly as she arrives there, she also gets summoned to work at that library. And she manages to do both, you know, she's a hustler. She can do both. She can house sit and she can work at the library. However, once she's working for the king, she realizes there's maybe some things going on that are not that good. And she kind of gets wrapped into mystery solving. It's basically a mystery solving of figuring out what's going on. The House of Many Ways, the book is called that way because the house of her uncle, it works that way that depending on where you go, like how fast you turn at a corner or in which direction you look, you end up in a completely different place. So for me, I would say from like the series, it is, I'm not sure if it's my least favorite because I really loved it as well. But I loved all three. Maybe I just, you know, maybe I can't rank them, which is fine. However, what I have to say for this book, compared to the other two books, for the first like 50% of the book, it wasn't quite clear where we're going. Like, what is our end goal? For the other two books, it's very clear. Our character goes off into the world and has a mission. However, for Charmaine, it wasn't quite clear what her mission was because her mission wasn't about her. It was about something bigger than her. And so it kind of took time to reveal that. But Diana Wynne Jones is the queen of whimsy. She has a way of writing magical things and the vibes. She's just so good at it. And I'm just always impressed. I'm just reading and I'm like, oh my God, I can imagine this world. I can imagine what it looks like and everything has kind of like sparkles on it and there's like things flying out and it's just also magical. And she really, really does an amazing job writing this whimsical vibes. For me, she's the queen of whimsy. She invented invented the whimsy. Actually, I don't know if she did, but for me, she's the standard. If I want a whimsy book, Diana Wynne Jones will have my back. In the end, I gave the book 4 stars because I loved it. It was fun. It was interesting. It was cozy in a way. I felt very comfortable in the train just listening to this book. It was very nice. I'm kind of sad to say goodbye to the Housewoman Castle series. I wouldn't have minded 5 more books in it, you know, but I think it's a good place to end as well. She could have written more books, to be honest, because of the way how the series works. So maybe as a whole for the series is not like that it's one storyline continuing. Basically, every single book has its own storyline, and we get characters that we've known from older books reappear again. So it's not a character-driven series per se. Each book is its own story. However, you should read them in order to get the whole picture. But yeah, 4 out of 5 stars for The House of Many Ways, and a big recommendation once again to read the Housewoman Castle series because all the books are really good. So the next book I read is cozy sci-fi. It's my first cozy sci-fi, and I've read the first novella in the Monk and Robot series. So I read A Psalm for the Wild Bill by Becky Chambers, and what a comfortable read. I just have to say it. So this story just feels like a blanket and a warm hug and a hot chocolate, but in a way that makes you think a little bit, in like a sophisticated way. Maybe it's more for tea, I don't know, but I like hot chocolate better. I also have this super beautiful edition, so I read it physically, as you can see, and this edition has both the first and the second novella in one. I only read the first for now. I will read the second eventually because I'm excited. So yeah, what is this book about? It's about a tea monk called Dex, and Dex is searching for something within them. It's about finding a purpose, I feel. Dex is not sure what they want to do with their life and where their life is going, so they kind of want to just go off and figure that out. They have this urge to go somewhere. Dex goes out into the world and meets a robot. Now, some history, robots have become sentient beings and they were done with the oppression of working for humans. And so there was a big movement a long time ago, a long time before Dex, where robots left human society to live in the wilderness. So it's actually called the wilderness, and Dex goes into the wilderness and they meet a robot. Our robot is called Splendid Speckled Mosscap because robots are named after the first thing they see when they get their conscious. So that's actually, I love it. The concept alone is like so amazing. Now, this book brought up a lot of themes of discrimination, for example, like how do humans talk about robots? What do humans actually know about their history with robots? How are these interactions? What do robots know? Because our robot, Mosscap, is actually sent out to figure out how are the humans doing. Meanwhile, the humans never even thought about checking on the robots because they felt they're not supposed to be in their business anymore. There's a lot of conversations between Dex and Mosscap where there are beliefs that, for example, Dex has that Mosscap questions and goes like, well, but why are you doing it like that? Why are you bothered by something? And it brings Dex to think a lot. And it also brought me to think because there's a lot of things that you can just take from this fictional story and put it onto your own life. So the book in itself felt philosophical in a way. I searched up a few times whether the book is considered philosophical because I thought there were a lot of questions about meaning of life, about what do you exist for, what do you live for, where are you going in life? All of these things, just the big questions coming up in this book, and I really thought they were executed in a very beautiful, in a very gentle way. So the book is actually a lot of conversations, but then what I also really loved is the way Becky Chambers describes the nature, describes the food. Oh gosh, the way Becky Chambers describes the food that Dex is cooking, amazing. I really loved it. It made me want to eat it even though it's like, you know, some things don't even exist, but just, it sounds so nice, so comforting, like something you just need right now. And so I really, really like the writing style. I think it's a very beautiful way of writing. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I will definitely read the second one. And I'm also looking if I maybe want to read, what's it called? The Long Journey to a Small Angry Planet, I think, because her writing style is really unique. So I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars as well. So another good read this month. So very happy about this one. Next up is another reread. I usually don't reread that much, but in September it just happened that I got 2. And I read this book for my book club. So I have a book club with a few people. It's 18 book club. If you know 80s, then you know what it means. But it's basically, we're all fans of the same K-pop group and we have a book club relating in some way to that group. So the book I read is called Illusions by Richard Bach. And I read it 2 years ago and it instantly became a favorite of mine. It was a 5-star read for me back then. It's still a 5-star read for me now. And I really, really enjoyed this reread. The first time I read it, I had it as an audiobook. This time I got the physical copy and read it as a book. It's a very cute small paperback, right? And I really love the cover. So the book has some autobiographical points in it. It's written in first person. Our main character is called Richard, so there's that. And also he does things that Richard Bach did. So he flies airplanes, and that's a hobby our author had. So there are certain autobiographical elements in it. And the book basically poses the question, what would happen if a messiah came to our earth now? So the book is actually, it's illusions, but then the adventures of a reluctant messiah. So it actually brings up the question of that a lot of people pose. I know it's common in TV series as well. What would happen if someone with magical power, someone who can change the world, if they showed up now, how would we treat them? In this book, our main character Richard meets a man who is a messiah and goes about his life with him. They kind of spend a lot of time with each other and learn from each other, or mainly Richard learns from his friend. And it's very interesting because the book, in one way, there's this supernatural elements of it, but in the other way, it's extremely human. It's extremely tied to a place on Earth, on our Earth, and how we as people experience things. Because apart from that messiah, nobody can do magic. He's like this being, and in our society, we could think about it ourselves. Like, would we believe that someone can do magic? I don't think so. And so this kind of poses these kind of questions. So many lines of this book are a quote. You can quote these lines, and for me, they had a very strong impact on like my mindset and how I think of things. Because what this book says a lot is that you have the power to do whatever you put your mind to. And I think that is such a strong stance that, as someone who manifests as well and someone who does affirmations, I very much can stand behind that. So for example, to read what I just found here is, every person, all the events of your life are there because you have drawn them there. What you choose to do with them is up to you. The fact that things are happening, you have the option to choose what you do with them. Example, my favorite quote of the book, it's actually also my header on YouTube, is, "The mark of your ignorance is the depth of your belief in injustice and tragedy. What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, a master calls a butterfly." How do you view a situation? How do you view your situation? If you tell yourself it's the end of the world, it is, but then maybe you can also see something bad happening to you as a moment to change or as a moment to evolve. For me personally, there was just many things that I could relate to, that touched me, that made me feel like, okay, I can do things, or I can be someone for myself that has an impact on myself, that not everything is just happening to me. Illusions, a book for me that I would also recommend to people, a 5-star read again this month, and I'm really happy I reread that one. So the next book I read as an ebook, and it is called The Heart of the Nhaga by Lee Dong-yo. So it's Korean original language. It's actually not out in English yet. So the English release will come in December of this year. I read it in German because the German translation has already been out for a while, but the book was actually written in 2003. So it's been a long time that this book has been released, and also the whole series, and it's only now being translated. So it's a fantasy series, and we are following 3 different guys from different species that have to go escort a Nhaga from the Nhaga territories in the south. So there's a whole history that is always brought up. There's a lot of things that happen before our book starts. This continent has experienced wars, has experienced the death of a species completely disappearing. They have experienced invasion from the Nhaga specifically, and they're constantly figuring out how they could maybe change their lifespans. There's magic, of course. There's certain creatures that were touched upon that I found such interesting concepts. For example, there was something called a skyfish. That's a fish in the sky flying, and there's ruins on top of it, which implies that maybe someone once lived there, but at the moment it's not possible to live there. So there's a lot of these things that come up that make you know, like, there is a whole world built around this story. And so what we are actually looking at in this story is just just a small part of everything that went on in this world. These three guys go into the forests of the Nhagas, and the Nhagas are very dangerous creatures. They do not have a heart, which means they're unkillable, basically. The only way to kill them is to cut them apart. They regrow their limbs. Like, they even regrow their heads if you just let them be. So Nhagas are, you know, they're immortal. The story has multiple POVs because we're following multiple characters, and we also follow a Nhaga character. I would say in the first book, he's definitely our protagonist. I don't know if this will change in the books to come, but in the first book, he feels like the main protagonist, and he does not want to get his heart removed. That's like his big thing. He does not want to get that heart removed because he's scared, because he's experienced something that's hinted at and it's revealed later what it is that makes him afraid of getting his heart removed. There's this whole arc in the beginning happening for him in the city he lives in, and then at the same time, we are seeing these three guys gathering together to go and rescue a Nhaga in the forest. We have these two stories that slowly move towards each other until they meet, and that's about in the middle of the book. And then we have them all together and learning more about this world, learning more about our characters, learning more about the people. So the book is very much an adventure. It's very much, okay, we have a goal, we want to get there, we want to do that, which makes it easy to read, in my opinion, because the stakes never feel that high. Because you know what they're doing. I was never sure, like, should I be scared for one of the characters or will everything turn out well? That was kind of always my thought. A big part of it is also that there are a lot of jokes, which I liked as well. There's some word plays that maybe in translation kind of get lost. Because I'm into K-pop, I know some Korean cultural things, not much at all. But that's why I was like, oh, okay, the humans are called Kim, which is the most common Korean last name. So kind of a joke on that every human is called a Kim because the first human that one species encountered was named Kim, as in the Korean last name Kim. So there's kind of these kind of things, and I thought it was entertaining. And overall, I felt it was something new for me, something refreshing. There was a lot on mythology, a lot on magical beings that I've never heard of before that are very different from what we know from Western fantasy. And I really, really like diving into a new fantasy world, a different fantasy world, and a different setting with different cultural background to kind of read how fantasy is interpreted there. So for me, it was a 4-star read. I really enjoyed the book. I felt it was nice to read, and I will definitely continue the series. I don't know when yet, but I'm planning on continuing. That was The Heart of the Nhaga by Kim Young-do. And finally, the last book. I read The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read it as an ebook, but I don't have it physically. Will I get it physically? I think it's one of these books I have to buy eventually. So it's the first book I read by Ursula K. Le Guin. If you don't know who she is, maybe you know The Wizard of Earthsea, that is also written by her. Maybe you've seen the Ghibli movie called Earthsea, that's the same thing. And oh my god. So this was recommended to me by a friend as well. Oh, great recommendation. I'm very grateful. If you're watching this, thank you so much. What a good story. So generally, I like sci-fi, so I've talked about that. I've gotten into sci-fi, and every single sci-fi book I read, it just gets better. Now, the first thing I want to say, I love that there were references to the time machine. I felt kind of cool going like, oh, I read one classic and now I'm reading a sci-fi story and I'm seeing the references. Amazing. References to time. The story. Okay, let's get into that. So The Dispossessed is the 6th book in the Heinisch cycle. The 6 out of 7 books. So it's the second to last. However, apparently you can start wherever. The Dispossessed is a good place to start, which is why I did it. That was recommended to me. And also I think when I Googled it, that was also mentioned a few times on like Reddit threads. So I was like, okay, I will start with The Dispossessed. And oh gosh, that's a good start. I really loved it. The Dispossessed plays on 2 planets, on Oras and Anaris. So it plays on these 2 planets, and we have our main character, Shevek is his name, and he lives on... And that was the exact moment my camera decided to stop recording. Yay! So this is me 3 days later, after I realized what happened in editing, trying to finish up that video. I was talking about Shevek, and he lives on Oras. That was what I was gonna say. He lives on Oras, and he's a scientist, and he's been doing his research. Now, what we have to know is that Oras is originally the moon of Anaris. So 160 years ago, there was a big movement on Anaris led by a person called Odo. She's very cool. I like Odo. She did a lot of cool things, and she was a revolutionist. She was a socialist, and she was done with the oppressive system that was going on Nhaga. So what happened was the people who were socialists like her were sent to the moon. Woo! Or well, technically they're gifted the moon to be able to live their lifestyle there because the place where they were before was not ready to change their systems. On Oros, we actually have the extreme version of socialism, which is we don't own anything, there's only the collective, so it's collectivism, and there's no government, and they're extremely technically advanced, or extremely for our standards here. Shevek obviously grows up with that mindset as well, and he lives there, and he does science, and his science is too advanced for the people in Aras. They do not agree with his ideas, they think he's just working for himself, and he goes to Anaris. It is later revealed how all of this happens, but when we start the book, he's on his way to Anaris to bring his science to them. And that's where the book goes off. The book always tells one chapter playing in our present with Shevek on Anaris and one chapter playing in Uras in the past. So parallel to each other, we build up this story, what is happening right now, but also how he even got there, because it's very unclear why he left Uras and what his plan is on Anaris. I really liked that kind of narration. It was very interesting. It always pulled me back and forth. Sometimes I was like, I want to continue, I want to know what happened, but it was always very interesting to see Shevek's background and understand his background story a little better. Why I love the book, as many sci-fis, it brings up a lot of political questions that are extremely relevant to our lived reality today. So obviously we have socialism, but we have socialism in a form that is very advanced from what we know as socialism. It feels more like a theory. Like if you say someone's a socialist today, that is not the image people have of this person. The image that we have today is that the person thinks healthcare should be free and education should be free and housing should be free. You know, that's like where we're at, and not that complete ownership of anything is given up. So I really liked to see what a society could look like that actually goes this length in socialism. I also really liked how on Anaris there was a very clear reference to the Cold War, or also to today, with a communist state and a more capitalist state forging wars on the earth and having completely different views and also being mistrustful of each other. And I think Ursula K. Le Guin said so many good things in this book. I've marked a ton of quotes, the things she said. I think they're very relevant to today, so I also think you should read the book. It's like relevant to our life and will always be relevant with how this world is going at the moment. I also really like Odo's idea. Odo said something that really stayed with me, something I strongly believe in and I never really heard anyone say, and I will quickly read it to you. Only peace brings peace. Only just acts bring justice. We cannot be divided on that on the eve of action. In our current world, a lot of people think war brings peace, and I'm a very strong pacifist. I strongly believe only peace brings peace. But there was a lot of other things that were said in this book where I just 100% agreed with. I also liked how it touched up on feminist themes, because obviously there were different forms of oppression towards women, or also objectification towards women. Our main character was a man as well, how he kind of viewed this treatment of women in his society, but then also in the society he visited while he was on the other planet. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. I feel it's a must read. Yeah, highly recommend this book, The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, finally, I'm coming to my October TBR. Obviously, by the time I'm recording this now, this part of it, October has already started quite a bit, but I will still tell you what is on my TBR. So usually I don't have a fixed TBR for a month. Usually I choose like 3-4 books that I maybe want to read. For October, I really want reads that go more into spooky direction, and so I put some books on my list that I want to read. And I think it's a total of 8 books, so let me just quickly go through them. The first one is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. That one, by the time I'm recording this, I already finished, so that was the first one I actually read. Then also on my list is Don't Let the Forest In. That one I've seen a lot of people recommend in the YouTube sphere that said is really good, and it's also queer, so I really like that. Then I have 2 classic authors on my list, And of course, it's my 2 Penguin archives that I got next to the time machine. So Heartfelt by Edgar Allan Poe. That's a collection of 5 short stories. The short stories in here are The Fall of the House of Usher. This one I've already read. Then The Murders in Rue Morgue, The Mask of the Red Death, The Telltale Heart, and Hop Frog, obviously. And the other one is the Bram Stoker one. It's The Burial of the Rats, which is also a collection of 5 short stories. So we have Dracula's Guest, The Judge's House, Gibbert Hill, The Squaw, and of course The Burial of the Rats. So I'm kind of scared of these 2 because, as I said, with the time machine, I struggle with classics, I struggle with the writing. I read the Edgar Allan Poe short story already, and I was like, oh, it's kind of complicated to read, but I'm excited to read them nonetheless. Another book I have on my TBR is actually one I had on my yearly TBR, which is Equal Rights by Terry Pratchett. That one was recommended to me by a friend, and I thought October sounds like a good one to read it, considering it's the first of the 3 Witches books in the Discworld series. It's my first Discworld book I will read. I'm very excited about it. I've heard so many good things about this entire universe, and I hope it's gonna live up to the hype and the expectations. Then I have a book written by fellow YouTubers. Their channel is called Talking Story, and it's Discovery by J.A.J. Minton. I'm really excited to read this one because I watched the trailer and I got like really scared. I'm really afraid of water or like deep sea stuff. I don't think we humans should be down there, and it plays on the water, so I feel it could be a really spooky read for me. I'm kind of nervous, but I really want to honor that a YouTube channel that I watched released the book, and I'm really excited to read it. And what better month to read cosmic horror than October, right? And then finally, the last book on my list is Gideon the Ninth. I'm curious about this one. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I will listen to it as an audiobook. That is my TBR. And then, of course, I still have my book club pick, which I've already started reading, which is Green Teeth by Molly O'Neill. So that's also a witchy read, but it's supposed to be cozy, so we'll see where this is going. So yeah, finally I finished my video. I hope everything was recorded this time, and we've come to the end. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And why don't you tell me if you've read any of the books that I've read this month, or if any of the books I have on my TBR is also one book that you want to read in October or in the rest of the year. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!